Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to my channel Touchstone. I'm Sage. Now today I want to take you guys a little bit further away from practical philosophy and go towards just some straight philosophy, because we're going to be talking about the ideas of subjectivity versus objectivity. Now, starting with objectivity, of course most of us will have been raised with this concept. It's the idea that there is a reality that is really there. So, you say, for example, if I hit some solid object, it is really there. It's not just my perspective. You take the ideas of the laws of physics. When I drop something, gravity is going to take it down. There is a real reason for that. It is an objective reality, and that objective reality ends up creating or having gravity in it, and so on and so forth. And, the discoveries of science in general, when it comes to biology, when it comes to light, when it comes to just everything, there is at bottom an objective reality that is really there. In the subjective point of view, which for most people is simply going to be an addendum, it's going to be a part of the objective perspective. It is the idea that because we have things like culture, because we have our own senses, because we have our own perspectives on things, those things are essentially subjective. So you have, for example, the fact that there are many different languages, many different cultures with several different sets of values. That's what we would call something subjective. So those are the two perspectives so far. Now, lately there's been quite a bit more debate on these subjects because we've reached a sort of impasse of extremes where the idea of objectivity as it stands is pretty much presented it already with the subjective elements in there, but then a new form of subjectivity, which is often called deconstructionism, I'll call it for this video ultimate subjectivity. It's the idea that because we can't take anything outside of our own perspectives, our own culture, our own background, and so on, and mostly just our own five senses and our own brain, our own minds, therefore, we have no way of really saying that there is, in fact, an objective reality at all. So, of course, in the debate, it's essentially trying to take away the objective perspective altogether, which is why it's been called deconstructionism. It's, essentially trying to take all of the things that we've essentially taken for granted in our paradigms of the world and just remove them. So the debate usually goes something like this. The subjectivists will say something like, language doesn't have any objective meaning. We all say different words in language, so therefore, it's all subjective. We can apply whatever meaning we want to words. Now, I have my own response to this idea, and it is that, yes, it is true. As I've said, there is subjectivity in the objective point of view. Yes, it is true that languages in general are subjective. We can use different words to mean different things. Subjective language is anchored in objective reality. So if I say in English, apple, and then say in some other language the same word that means apple, the fact of the matter is we are still using words to identify an objective thing that is an apple. So it's really anchored in objective reality, and it doesn't necessarily get rid of it simply by saying, that language is subjective in general. So then you go to the more well-known level of the same argument that basically says, words have no meanings. Again, we can apply any meaning we want to these words. And the objectivist response essentially goes, well, okay, if that's true, then I can apply, or you can apply any meaning you want to the statement that statements have no meaning as language has no meaning. So, that statement either includes itself or discludes itself, and if it includes itself, then it doesn't mean anything to say that, and if it excludes itself, it's illogical, and it's simply unfair, unreasonable argumentation in the first place. And the same kind of thing happens when you're talking about truth. The same people will often say there is no such thing as absolute reality, there is no such thing as truth. And once again, does that statement include itself or exclude itself? And if it includes itself, then that cannot either be true, and it just cancels out. If it includes itself, it's illogical and unfair. Now, I've heard some subjectivists try to simply, sweep these arguments under the rug and say, oh, but that's just a dumb argument, I'm not going to debate that. But avoiding an argument is not answering an argument. So, no, this does need to be faced. And one of the more hilarious fruits of this perspective is that you have some people on occasion, saying that they don't even know if they exist. They don't really know if anything exists whatsoever. And that can sometimes become rather comical. Dude, so like, what if everything we're experiencing is just in our own minds and nothing is really real at all? Well, if that were true, then I would only be a figment of your imagination, and myself, this conversation as a whole, wouldn't even be happening at all. Dude. I remember one time that C.S. Lewis encountered one of these gentlemen in a debate, and he was, essentially saying, "I'm not even sure that I exist," to which Lewis casually responded, "Well, I do feel embarrassed trying to address somebody who isn't there." And then you have another example of a professor, I can't remember his name, but one of his students was asking the question, how do I even know that I actually exist? To which he, looked above his glasses and simply asked, "And whom, may I say, is asking?" So, that sort of stuff is quite funny. But the truth of the matter is, there is still some reasons that we could have to doubt essentially everything. Using fiction as a good guideline, what if, for example, we're all in the Matrix and everything that we're experiencing is just some projection? And the objectivist response to this generally goes something like this, that even if all of our experiences are just some subjective feed-in, as it were, then there's a reality outside that. Once again, just like the Matrix, right? There's a reality outside that, and that's the real world. Or maybe there's another layer of some program, some, pushed-in reality that we're only experiencing. Well, then there's therefore another reality outside of that, and another reality outside of that. And eventually you have to come to an objective reality that's actually there. And finally, when it comes to the debates themselves, very often the subjectivist will try to say things like, the objective point of view, thinking that reality is really real, is somehow damaging to us, damaging to culture, maybe to our minds and our health or something. And very often the response is simply to ask, okay, then what advantages do we get from the subjective point of view? And I haven't ever heard, I haven't done that much searching, but I haven't ever yet heard a good practical reason to believe in ultimate subjectivity. In fact, I think that most of us know fairly intuitively that really the opposite is the case. That if you believe subjectivity, ultimate subjectivity, that nothing is really there, then you have really no reason to feel that anything that you're doing in life has meaning. You don't really have any good reason to be ambitious, to look forward in life, because all of it is applying to this, could be anything else. Everybody's perspective is just as objective as anybody else's, and nothing is really real. How can you really live in that kind of a reality? I don't think we could. It would actually hurt our mentality, our psychology, and our emotions to believe in subjectivity to that ultimate of a degree, whereas objectivity gives us back our ambition, gives us back our reason to think that what we're doing actually has an impact on an objective reality. Now, that all having been said, there are still some people who could reply, "Yes, I will admit that you have given a very good argument for objectivity. But the fact of the matter is that because our experiences are still our own subjective realities that are only experienced by us individually, objective reality still may not in fact be there whatsoever." And at this point, I'm going to do something rather surprising. I haven't seen this done by others of my same type, but fact of the matter is, subjectivity really does have a point here. We have no way to get outside of our own subjective experience, our own perspective, our own five senses. So we have no rock hard, rock solid, definite way to prove that objective reality is really real. Objective reality is the thing on trial here, so you cannot simply prove it absolutely without a shadow of a doubt. If you've been following this argument so far, what that means is, in order to accept that objective reality is really there, the penultimate step is technically a leap of faith. And that having been said, I would like to leave you all with a question for the end of this video. If it does take a leap of faith to acknowledge something as simple, as obviously reasonable, as very rational as accepting that there is an objective reality, then when it comes to other things that we see, it seems very intuitive to us. People throughout history have always accepted it. There's plenty of evidence to support it. it is in fact a very rational step to take, but that penultimate step at the same time is still a leap of faith. Why in those cases do we think that it's irrational? So that's all for today. You've been listening to yours truly, Sage. I hope you found this video interesting and edifying, and until next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like. If you'd like to see more of this material, please subscribe, and you can always suggest new ideas for material in the comments. This is a very new channel, and I plan to be doing one new video per week. You know, and another thing, if all of this was just happening in your head, then this entire conversation, everything I'm saying, is happening in your head too. Do you think that you're coming up with everything that I'm saying? Huh?